like it. Didn't hear that.
So we are picking up with exposition of the book of Genesis again this morning. Our class schedule says that we are to be finishing up the background of the book, which we finished yesterday. Well, I gave you a reading on authenticity instead of notes.
Do you have the class schedule?
You were sleeping. I was.
You gave us a reading.
I read to you.
Oh.
Like you remember back in public school, how the teacher used to sit in class and read stories?
Yeah, but you told us we didn't have to take notes.
No, I didn't want you to take notes.
I finished it off.
I finished it off. So we're supposedly picking up with survey of the book of Genesis, chronology of events. And I had 2 pages into which I put laborious effort.
Oh, good.
And I have lost my file. And I don't know where it is. And I'm going to have to keep looking for it. I think I know somebody that I can photocopy it back from.
How could you lose it?
Well, I put it somewhere and I can't find it. I looked for an hour and a half this morning.
On your computer or a
No,
file?
file.
Paper. Paper mismanagement.
Oh.
So I can't find it and I want to find it. However, I will refer you to some notes in the Genesis record that you will find of interest. My notes will corroborate these notes, but in the back of the book there are a number of appendices. This is in the back of your textbook. It's plural of appendix. An appendix is something you add to the end of your book. So look on page 675 in the Genesis record. Appendix 2 is entitled Chronology of the Patriarchs in Genesis. What number? Page 675. In my edition.
Chronology. Is he a patriarch?
Everyone hear us here? Chronology of the Patriarchs in Genesis. And if you are going to talk about chronology of events, the first 50 chapters of Genesis, which is what the whole book is all about, deals with the lives of what patriarchs? What patriarchs? Yes. Pardon? All 50 chapters.
We'll say Abraham is one.
No.
Not Moses.
Moses is one to left.
Moses doesn't appear until Exodus.
We don't get to call Adam a patriarch.
Oh yes, he's a patriarch.
Yeah, I mean,
Adam.
okay. I never heard the term used.
Adam, Seth, Noah, Enoch, Methuselah, all those guys. Patriarch. Well,
Beginning.
a revered ancestor. Patriarch is a famous progenitor. Does that help you?
Revered ancestors are good for me.
Progenitor, I think I'll stick to that. Patriarch.
Janitor, what's he got to do with it?
Progenitor.
Oh.
Progenitor. What did he clean? Am I a progenitor or clean the bar? Not pro.
First 50 chapters.
Yes, the first patriarch mentioned in the book of Genesis is Adam.
Okay.
First matriarch is
Who?
Eve. Yes, the Greek word for father is pater, from which we get our word patriarch. And the Greek word for mother is
Say that other word.
mater.
Mater.
Oh no.
Okay, so when I get your other notes to you on the chronology or the background aid of the events in this book, we will be using this to compare with, just to see how badly off I was.
Those books aren't in yet.
They're not in. You'll notice with interest that he computes in this appendix the dates. The when the patriarchs died from creation. So Jacob died in the year 2255 AC after creation.
Neat. I thought that was all
That's
really
kind of
current.
interesting, isn't it? That's just going by the literal statements, not assuming that there are no gaps, and it's very likely that there are gaps in the chronology. Okay? Very interesting. The next page, 676, Appendix 3, gives you a chronology of important events in the book of Genesis. Again, dated in years after the creation. Once again, assuming no gaps in the genealogical lists. And so creation is set to 0. Seth's birth is set at 130 because it tells us that when Adam was 130 years of age, he begot Seth. Okay?
It's worth making a photocopy of.
Probably, yeah.
Considering that his he was created a full grown man, and
Adam was the only person that had an age that was less than his actual
well, what we would consider growth.
agedness.
Yeah, niece. If that's the proper term to be used in this class.
Now there's about 150 years.
Dinner's not yet. You okay? Tired?
No.
Just a thought?
Great.
About one.
Oh, it's nothing.
We all have to, but we got Saturday, Sunday, Monday.
No, still
Neither have
The
I.
kind of chart to do.
I've done it.
Maybe we can all get together.
It's true,
I'm not doing my Bible.
I did it now.
I'm done for last week. I need to ready for this week. You said something I was going to repeat or... It wasn't reversed, but... Sorry.
The significance of doing these chronological charts, and I can only illustrate because I don't have the actual facts, but let's say that Adam lived 930 years, and when he was 130 he got Seth, and Seth lived Seth died in 1042, so that's another 150 years, so he went to here, and so forth, and these fellows overlap. You can perceive that, therefore, this guy and this guy were alive when Adam was still alive, because Adam didn't die to here. See? And so as these fellows continue on,
Piece of chalk and heavy dust.
that could be used as an experiment to show that anything that has mass is attracted to anything else that has mass. Anyways, we are very much
I
sidetracked.
think we get that lady.
So the point is that conceivably, somebody like let's say Noah, could have known personally Adam.
Isn't that amazing? I found that amazing when I seen the chart on it.
What is this about Methuselah? It's got 365, but no 3. That's what that is.
Not Methuselah, Enoch.
No.
Yes.
Oh yes, I'm sorry.
He left the earth in his 987th year by the calculations given in the genealogies. Now the neat thing about this is that this is working with creation at 0, right? Is the starting place. Okay, now we don't use creation because creation to us is an unknown, an undated, in the undated past. We use Christ, right? And so BC will at some point match AC after creation. And it does in the time of Moses, because about the time of Moses, we do have actual secular, that is extra-biblical records on Egyptian monuments and all that kind of stuff about events that were corresponding to things in the Bible. And so at that point, then you're able to add to BC these data from AC, and you can compute a tentative date for the beginning of the world. And an Anglican archbishop back in Britain, 100 years ago, with the name of Archbishop Usher, computed that creation was 4004 BC. Now, since that time, his assumptions about the genealogies have been questioned, and it's more than likely that there are gaps in the genealogies of which we don't find any evidence until the New Testament genealogies or Chronicles later on in the Old Testament. And so that means that this date should be shoved back even further. So conservative scholars today believe that the date of creation is anywhere from about 5,000 BC to 15,000 BC. Very much different from evolutionary scientific theory.
Oh. Steve, out of it may not be directly proportioned to this, but in regards to dating that they find, that they're dating from, do these people date from, what are they dating from? Like in Egypt, are they dating from a king, or are they dating from, the king's reign?
Well, they have several different systems of dating.
Because they don't go back to creation and start out.
Most dating systems, to my knowledge, about the ancient world were based on the reigns of the particular monarchs or dynasties in existence at the time. And the only way you can relate, let's say, the Assyrian chronologies that you find is to translate what they actually say took place. So let's say that in the Assyrian chronology at this point, just for illustration's sake, let's say that this was the 30th year of this particular king's reign. Okay? And he says that I took over in the 14th year of the preceding king's reign. And he happens to mention that in the 30th year of his reign, he made a raid on Israel and took captive King Jehu and made him pay tribute and brought back captives. And this is an actual example that is found on a post or a column over in Iran. You can still go there if you were able and read it, if you could understand language. This is in existence, an actual quotation. He says, in my 30th year, I went to Israel, captivated this Jewish king. Well, by Jewish reckoning, they have their own reckoning standards, and we can compute from biblical data when Jehu lived. See? He lived in the 9th century BC by biblical reckoning. So therefore we are able to relate secular Assyrian information, dating methods to Judeo.
And then you can go either way on theirs, plus.
And this is how they do it. They just correlate it not by dating methods, because everybody's dating methods are relative.
Yeah.
But you have to go by events that are recognized. And in fact, they do the same thing with meteorological data. For instance, there was something I read the other day that, for instance, there are flood legends in dozens of different cultures around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And now that's going back too far to actually date it. But that sort of thing. The Star of Bethlehem, that's it. The Star of Bethlehem is dated in Assyrian annals. And so that's an extra biblical point by which they can check out different chronologies and come up with a pretty general secular with biblical analysis of events.
It seems to be good to be alive at this time when it comes to being able to find out the information that is supporting the scriptures. As 100 years ago or 200 years ago, all this information wasn't available.
That's right, it hasn't been discovered yet.
Yeah, they've got the Mayan statues for the pharaohs in Egypt. So Moses' father and his half brother was wanted to start out. And as Moses gave the heir throne, I guess. He started that statue and not the one and gone to the next one. Just happens to correlate. It's too freaky.
was aware of that.
Well, they dated, they got the names on it, which the king was, and the next one was blank, and they went on to the next one. So, where's this guy that should have been here? That was around that time.
You can purchase charts that relate to the secular, to the biblical chronologies of the dates. It's fascinating. You know, like history.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is, as I mentioned in the synthesis course, the first 3 chapters of Genesis record events in the undated past. That is, the creation and the fall. Conservative scholars believe such events to be literal and historical, and possibly to be dated between 15,000 BC and 4,000 BC. Example, Morris, Parker, Unger, and Usher. Dates before 2000 BC are only approximate because of the lack of archaeological confirmation. The genealogies are not considered sufficient to date such events with precision, since after the days of the patriarchs, the genealogies lack a specific time frame for cross-referencing the family trees. Dates from Abraham down can be estimated but are tentative. Thus, a conservative estimation of the dates of the events of the book of Genesis range from 15,000 BC at creation to 1500 BC at the time of Moses. Right? So therefore, a chronology of events, which is what we're discussing for the book of Genesis as background information, covers a period of probably 14,500 years.
So it could be quite easily the gap theory fit in there.
No, because the gap theory
Goes bigger, larger.
attempts to put several hundreds of thousands of years into the, no, more than that, several millions, to correlate with the so-called, the dates that the evolutionary theory supposes. They suppose over, what, 3-point-some billion years or 4 billion years?
So on the other side, people keep going in this
Close in my math, huh?
So I'll try to get you those specific charts. That really makes it interesting when you can actually look at which patriarchs were alive when Adam was alive. Just go down on a piece of graph paper and map it out. And that's all they've done to come up with this data. It's just nicer visually. Yeah.
What is interesting now you're thinking along these analysis stuff. Where's my first son and the last son? Let's get these names on like when you're doing the genealogy, such and such, first time, the other son, and then the last son. If you go to the next genealogy, that line, they go to the last son. There's a whole.
And Archbishop Us, or USS Perk. Genealogy is fascinating. It's trivial in the sense that it's not spiritual, but it is crucial if you're talking about the credibility of a book, the authenticity of a book, and how it relates to world events. To do those kinds of detailed studies. We'll come back to that when I find my notes. Let's move on to key verses, chapters, words, and themes. Here in the book of Genesis. Key verses and chapters and words and the theme of the book of Genesis. I believe that the key verse in the book of Genesis is chapter 1, verse 1. But there will probably be several key verses depending on which perspective you are looking at. Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. That is key because it introduces the context of the Bible. It introduces the God of the Bible. It introduces the scope of the Bible. You know, I'm just making, for instance, it introduces the priorities of the Bible. First God, first, then heaven, then earth, in that order. Right? God is supreme. Heaven is his realm. Heavenly things are more important than earthly. They remain in that order all the way through Scripture. Introduce us to the relative priorities. You might say that chapter 3:15 would be a key for the book. I would say perhaps another one, 3:6 could be considered a key verse because this is the pivotal event in the history of the human race from the biblical perspective, which sin entered the human race, completely altering the original order. So 3:6 could be considered a key. 3:15, for the first time, introduces us to the divine response and remedy for sin. God's response is, there's going to be war. I will put enmity. God says, I put enmity between you, Satan, and the woman. That is, between the spiritual forces, angelic, that are opposed to God, and the human forces in the world. And between your seed and her seed, he shall bruise thy head, thou shalt bruise his heel. Ultimately finding this major confrontation between the devil and Christ. Key verse. And you could consider chapter 5, verse 1 another key verse. This is the book of the generations of Adam, in the day that God created man. In the likeness of God created he him. Did you know? Does anybody know what Adam's name means? To pronounce Adam's name in Hebrew is to say Adam. Adam. To pronounce the Hebrew word for man is Adam. It actually means man, just man. So if you reread Genesis 5:1 that way, this is the book of the generations of man. In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him. In other words, this book is basically about man as descended from Adam, as created by God. So that could be considered a key verse. There are probably others, particularly in chapter 6 where it mentions the flood and God's response to that. That's all I'll give you. Everybody should be able to give me some key chapters of the book of Genesis. You have 50 to choose from. Allison, first choice.
What about, Tower of Babel,
Okay, you can consider chapter 11,
the scattering of man?
right? That's a key chapter because it reveals the origin of nations, languages, and conflict. Prior to this time, you do not see any international conflict or cross-cultural conflict because this is where cultural differences began. Genesis 11, key chapter in the Bible. Another chapter left. All right, chapters 6 to 8 are key chapters. They reveal why the world is today as it is. That is, physically, geographically, even zoologically. You understand? Zoology is the science, I believe, of animals, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The animal kingdoms. Did you know that the various species of animals basically it ended up, at least the original stock of what we now see, they ended up where they are, like they are, after the flood. The flood is really was determinative as to the shape of the continents, shapes of the oceans, even the changed atmospheric conditions. You're talking about the physical world, atmospherically and geologically. So those three chapters, 6, 7, and 8, are basically in the Bible to explain why things are the way they are. Why, if you travel to the Northwest Territories, do you go out in the center of the tundra and find coral, fossilized coral beds, 200 or 300 feet above sea level? Coral, which grows only in tropical waters. The flood is the only explanation for phenomena like that. Okay? Brian, another key chapter.
I think one of the key chapters would be chapter 1.
Certainly, right.
It explains what the whole beginning. Explanation of creation, explanation of man, created man, God, is unidentified God.
So there's one word for that. It explains origins. Origins, period. Right? Origins of the universe, origins of man, origins of time. That's it. Space, matter, and time. And man. Chapters actually 1 and 2 together. Okay? And we have to include at least one more chapter as key to the book. There's at least one more key chapter in the book.
As far as history goes. Well,
Chapter 12, why?
that's what Abraham
Yes, it
was.
explains. Good. It has to do with Abraham. Who is Abraham? Of who? What nation?
Israel.
Father of the Jews. So here in the 12th chapter of Genesis, you have a record of the origin of the Hebrew race, or the origin of the Jew emphasis of the Bible, for that matter. Our Bible is called the Judeo-Christian Scriptures. Okay? Jew-oriented. So that's the basic explanation. It starts in chapter 12.
And then also the first line of which Jesus was going to be going into.
Certainly. You know, the Abrahamic covenant of Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 3, which where we find the first statement of it. The Abrahamic covenant said that through Abraham the whole world would be blessed. That's the primary promise of the Abrahamic covenant. So
That's
yes.
1 to 3?
Yes,
Chapters,
Genesis 12,
verses?
Genesis 12, 1 to 3. It says that through Abraham the whole world would be blessed. So not only the Jew emphasis comes out of chapter 12, but also the Christological, the soteriological, God would save the world. through Abraham. Or someone descended from Abraham. Key words for the book.
That's one that way.
Created.
Okay, you could say that created is a key word. Just because of its massive importance. Not the number of titles you read. Right? But its significance. What were you going to say, Steve?
Us.
Man?
No, God. Us.
Let us? That's not spelled L-E-T-T-U-C-E. Oh, just us. You could say that. It's used 3 or 4 times in the book. High significance.
Us.
Us, which is God speaking.
It's a plural. One.
See, when you're talking about key words, well, key words according to certain perspectives, no. Theologically, us and created have to do with God, right? His power, His person.
This one stands on the Trinity.
And action. Yeah.
Yeah, one has to do with His person, one has to do with His power, right? His works. That's the difference. Okay? Somebody said image. Okay? That's a key word anthropologically as regards man. Any other? Generations. Where'd you get that? Where'd you get that? That happens to be Henry Morris's choice for a key word to the book. The word is used 10 times in the book with great significance. I'll give you the references. And this is where I got it. In chapter 2, 4 to 426 is the first generation. Chapter 5, 1. Well, you can get them from Morris. It's either a copy of his book or listen to me. Well, it just proves that they're there.
What was the other second one?
I'll read you the verse. Let's see, 426.
No, 2.
2:4. Somebody read that. 2:4.
These are the generations of the heavens and of the earth, when they were created in the day that the Lord made the earth and the heavens.
So we read 5:1.
This is the book of the generation of Adam, and the day that God created man and likeness of God.
6:9.
These are the generations of Noah. Noah was the best man and perfect in his generation. Noah walked with God.
10:1.
Now these are the generations of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Then to them were the sons born after the flood.
11:10 says, these are the generations of Shem. He's narrowing it down. First the world, then Adam, then Noah, then Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begot Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. 11:27. Now these are the generations of Terah. So after Shem you have Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, Haran. 25:12. Now, I think we left out Abraham, didn't we? After Terah, should have the generations of. Did I read 11:10? Must have 11:27. Yes. 25:12. Now these are the generations of Ishmael. Abraham's son. And verse 19, these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. (36:1). Now these are the generations of Esau, who is Edom. And the whole 36th chapter is his. And then 37:2. These are the generations of Jacob.
That was 36 too?
37:2.
7.
Right. So there's no doubt that the author of the book of Genesis, which is more than likely Moses, chose this word as the hinge pin with which to draw his plot, to tell the record. Okay? Generations is his key. Right? These others are no question, without question, key words for the specific doctrines. What's that? All right. Well, it is, in a sense, it has to do with not only soteriology, you're right. It has to do with the sovereign plan of God, period. Yeah, covenant, there was another key word. Very good. We have covenants with who in the book? I've already mentioned Abraham in chapter 12. Isaac. God said,
Well, those are
still, the word is repeated with Isaac and also with Jacob and also with well, maybe it isn't repeated with Joseph. But there's no doubt that he knew the details of the covenant.
I was thinking of multiplying. I thought Dave Jensen was supposed to have 6 kids.
God blessed Noah, chapter 9, verse 9, and said, Behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you. And the Noahic covenant is an everlasting covenant. Verse 16, I will look to it that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh. The Abrahamic covenant was soteriological for the world. That is, that it would be the means through which God would save all the elect. For the Jews, it was a national covenant. That is, guaranteed land, boundaries, eternal existence as a nation, identity. The Noahic covenant was physical in the sense that it guaranteed no more flood, no more destruction by flood. It guaranteed the eternal existence of the seasons, as long as the world shall last. 4 seasons, even if they are only a day long, like summer up here.
Sounds world will last.
Good. Key words. What time is it?
Level 5.
And we'll pick up with our theme and the message to the book of Genesis next class. And I hope maybe we can finish off our
Hope you find it out.
chronology of events. If you have your authorship of Genesis papers, I'll take them.